Hello, I'm Rosemary Ravenel, public speaking coach and media trainer. Welcome to Makeover Mondays on LinkedIn Live and Facebook. This is a space that's designed to improve your life on the small screen. And my guests are innovative communicators and thinkers who are reshaping the way we communicate on video conferences. So for 30 minutes, we'll have a great conversation. I expect your questions. Please post them in the chat. I'll be monitoring to make sure that we get to all of them. Let me introduce my guest and let's get started. Welcome, Achim and Ugo. Let me introduce Achim first. Achim is a dear friend. He is a trainer of CEOs and C-suite executives to help them show up with relaxed authority and to amplify their personal influence. He's the author of 3 books, all related to authentic success behavior. He's also the host of My Fourth Act, a podcast where he chats with brilliant humans who are creating authentic, bold, and unexpected lives. Welcome, Achim.
Hi, Rosemary.
Hi, and Hugo Sanchez is the relationship manager for Brilliant Best, Achim's company. And for the next 30 minutes, we're going to have a lively conversation about why Zoom is actually better than in-person meetings. And to get started, Achim, tell me, how have you pivoted your work to Zoom?
You know, my light bulb moment happened actually about 4 years ago, before the pandemic changed the way we conduct business. And I was in Germany tending to my 92-year-old mother who just had a stroke. And Zoom was a hot new medium. And it literally was a light bulb moment. That year I flew to Germany 10 times and I was in hotel rooms a lot. And I realized that everything I do as a C-suite business coach, facilitator, I can do just as well via Zoom. So I'm mentioning Zoom because Zoom had the technology that other platforms at the time didn't have. And so when the pandemic happened, 95% of my work was already via Zoom. But the pandemic sort of encouraged me and emboldened me to investigate even further all the different things we can do with virtual work. So I'm an ardent fan and have been for a good 4 years.
Right. You certainly have the history. However, you're sort of going against the grain, right? Because most people now, particularly with the changes in safety guidelines, are eager to get back to work in physical spaces. So how would you encourage us to look at this differently? I know you've given me 5 wonderful reasons why. Mm-hmm. So in the time we have here, I'd love to explore, and I want Ugo to weigh in because he plays such an important role in making your work on Zoom function efficiently. So tell me, where do we start with this? How do we start to look at this process as a real benefit versus that dreaded Zoom fatigue? Oh no, not another Zoom call. Oh no, I don't want to be virtual anymore. How would you convince us to think about this differently?
The technology of Zoom gives me lots of options about how I organize a group experience. Options that I don't have in person. In person, traditionally, we have a meeting, we have 12 people, they sit in a boardroom, we're all in the same space, and usually those meetings are what I call one directional. Somebody's leading the meeting, she or he asks the question, and then somebody jumps in and answers. And that's the traditional structure. Well, with Zoom, we can do so many other things that bring a meeting to life. And I want to start with the idea that what I found very freeing is when I do any sort of Zoom event beyond one-on-one coaching, I like having a producer with me. Hugo is in that role, who handles all the technology. We plan it out in front so I can purely focus on being in the moment with the work I'm doing as a former leader of the event. And that's right. Really powerful.
Mm-hmm. So your first nugget of wisdom is to have a producer handle the technology.
And Hugo, maybe we just spent 2 weeks doing all sorts of stuff where you were the producer. Maybe you can explain a little bit what you do as the producer when you support me, and it's a wonderful partnership.
Well, as a producer, you want to make sure that everybody is set up properly in the room. That means they have their mic is sounding properly. They don't have any echo or noisy background noise that is being disruptive. You want to make sure that they have their camera on, admit people into the room. So that's pretty much like the basic setting. There is a pre-work before that, and that's like it happens all the time that people, when they try to join the Zoom meeting, they can't find the link. It's happening less and less as we get more used to it, but it's still happening. So making sure that you make that link to access the meeting accessible, it's kind of like the first step. Also, as a producer, you find ways to make the meeting more engaging. And it's a collaboration with the facilitator or the person, in this case, Achim, on many of the things that you can do on Zoom to make it more interactive. Rosemary has talked about them on their blog, and Achim, I'm sure we're going to talk about that later on today.
Right. And if I could suggest also explaining the different roles that people could take, not only your producer, but I don't know if Achim, you also have someone watching the chat, making sure that the Q&A is addressed, if people have raised hands. I mean, all of that is part of the engagement equation.
I totally second everything you said. When you and I work together, Hugo also follows the chat, but it's a wonderful way of sharing roles and responsibilities, and there's a dynamic that doesn't happen in a traditional meeting where you have one authority, and here you have multiple voices who take ownership, which I think is fantastic.
Mm-hmm. Now, participation is a big question. I know that I've written a lot about it. I'm sure your clients are also saying, how do we get more engagement? How do we get people to pay more attention and feel like they have some ownership in the meeting? What would you suggest?
Well, the classic meeting is, we're all sitting at the table, and usually the most assertive people jump in and talk, right? And the complaint often is that 3 or 4 people dominate and they drive the conversation, and the leader has to figure out a way to get others in. Well, the structure of Zoom, which is very much based on facilitative structures with the breakout rooms, allows us to say, hey, here's a big question, who wants to answer it? But instead of throwing to the group, say, hey, let's go into 3 groups, and you kick this around for 10 minutes. And when we go to 3 groups, 3 mini groups, 10 minutes each, a lot more people have a chance to speak. So we break out. If you did that in a boardroom, we're aware that we have these groups and we hear the other groups talking, and it's distracting, right? We've all been in moments where in a training where these table groups and other groups distract us. Well, on Zoom, the groups don't distract each other. That's the beauty. So you get to have a much deeper conversation. It's always more intimate than what you get when you have the whole group together. And the technology makes it seem really natural. It's not forced. When we're in a traditional meeting where we have 12 people, we say, oh, talk to the person next to you. It feels kind of weird, right? Like we're trying too hard. But here, technology says, oh yeah, let's break out, let's talk. And it just creates more engagement and a deeper conversation. And you've all heard the common feedback is, and I'll have to chuckle, a lot of the people that are clamoring for in-person meetings are the same people that used to complain about how much they hated in-person meetings, right? I love the intimacy of Zoom. I have more, but let me stop here.
What I found very interesting about the breakout rooms is that you can do them on the fly as you're presenting. You can plan them out beforehand, but if in the moment you feel that the group needs a breakout room, technology-wise, you can set them up very, very fast in Zoom. And it's actually as opposed to a facilitation in person, where sending people into reduced groups would take a lot of time to reorganize that room. In a breakout room on Zoom, you can totally do that in a matter of like half a minute. Have people leave, then they'll do the breakout room session for 5 minutes or 3 minutes, and then they're back into the main room in 30 seconds. It's just a very smooth experience for everybody.
And the beauty of what Hugo just said, and for me of having a producer, is if I'm leading myself on my own live, then I worry about the mechanics of it. In Zoom, because I have a producer, I would say, Hugo, are we ready for a breakout? And Hugo handles that for me. And it actually shows a wonderful collaboration, and it frees me up to focus on other things like the dynamics of the group.
Right. And do you suggest that in a given meeting, let's say an hour meeting, that there be more than one breakout?
Two thoughts. Obviously, it depends on what we want to accomplish.
Sure.
My advice would be any time that we feel a conversation is lagging or it's not going as deep as it could, the most powerful breakout for me is a traditional paired share, put people in twos. When I put you with one other person, you have to show up. You have to say something. It's rude to not engage. And you can do that. And that can be a quick 2-3 minute break. It changes the energy. Again, if you do that in an in-person meeting, it's probably going to feel weird, right? When you say, hey, turn to the person next to you and discuss this question, and suddenly it gets very loud in the space. Well,
Right.
in Zoom, no. In Zoom, two people have a private moment where they get to talk about something, and that's really powerful.
Right, right. No, my question went to the idea of if you pair someone up and then you say, well, why was I put in that group? And I really wanted to be in the group with someone else, and so it gets into the I guess sort of making sure everyone feels included, and because I've had some issues where people say, well, why did you put me in the breakdown with that person? And look, no one can be happy 100% of the time. But speaking to the collaboration, what are some of the other techniques that you would suggest to get people not only to talk to each other, but to really collaborate in problem solving?
We love using like a blackboard or whiteboard annotation. And annotation is just a simple tool that you can use on Zoom where
Right.
it's the equivalent of people writing on a flip chart. But the beauty is the moment your team knows how to do an annotation, you ask a question or you pose a problem, and suddenly 12 people are writing on the same flip chart at the same time. It's a lot faster than when you do that in person. You see who's writing what, and there are different ways of doing it, but it's powerful. Like within a minute, you have populated a white space with lots of words and language, which is way faster than it ever happens in an in-person meeting. Hugo, we did a bunch of those in recent weeks. Anything you'd like to add about?
Yeah, I want to share.
Function?
I want to share 3 ways in which you can use annotation on your. I mean, in order to access the annotation, there are plenty of resources out there, so I'm not going to get into the technicalities of it. But how do you use it in a facilitation? We found 3 ways that are effective. One is, as Achim said, have a whiteboard, and you can have, for example, one open question, or you can have 2 columns or 3 columns with different categories, and have people brainstorm inside each one of those big buckets. As a producer, you want to make sure that you're reorganizing things because people might type on top of the other one, so you can actually move that annotation as a producer to make it look clear. That's one. The second one, in the annotation feature, you not only you can type in, but you can use stamps like checks or thumbs or stuff like that. So we have found that you can do voting in, let's say you can do polls on Zoom, but if you want to do it like a quick, very fun thing, you can have many options and then have people put a stamp next to the ones that they agree on. And it's just fun and engaging. You can have, again, like a phrase in the center, a statement, and if you agree, put the stamp on the right. If you disagree, put the stamp on the left, for example.
Yeah.
And the third one is like you can actually draw, so that can get messy. One thing that is like we've seen another program is that you have like disordered things in 2 columns, and then you match them, and you can do a drawing. So you match a concept with something on the right. So you use the annotation to go from one side to the other as people are coming up with the answers. So It's very dynamic.
Right. No, that's wonderful. It's sometimes difficult to draw with a mouse, but if you're just connecting dots and setting up relationships of one column to the other, that can be great fun. Those are terrific examples. Terrific. We have a question.
May I add one more comment to it, because the examples were awesome, Hugo. But what I love as the leader of a meeting, because everything is represented visually. There is a peer pressure to participate. Does that make sense? If I ask you to do something you don't, you actually look bad because we can tell that you're not. So the peer pressure element, it's the subtext, drives a higher level of engagement than you will ever get in person. And your engagement is instantly visible, which is really powerful.
Exactly. Yes, and there's no way to hide behind a video off, right? So you really have to show up and be in attendance visually, and that's extraordinarily important. Still, there is a still relatively low level of video on participation in meetings, and that's really a shame for all the reasons you just described. It can be fun, and you really need to stay present in order to have influence. We have a question from Karen, and Karen, she wants to know where did you find producers to support any Zoom meeting?
I don't know what kind of work you do, Karen, but if you work in, let's say, in a traditional corporate role, which is the space where I work, I have a hunch there might be people who would enjoy being part of a meeting where their role is not to run the meeting, their role is to I used to be a theater director in a previous life, and the equivalent would be the stage manager. And they love the mechanics of it. So a big company, a big insurance company that you and I just did some work with, they find volunteers who like the idea of being a producer on these events, and they get to take an hour or two, and they get to be part of it, and they get to take partial ownership by being producers. So it can actually be very empowering. But you got to find those folks. I agree. But again, the company we just worked with, people volunteer. They love the idea of being involved and being of service in a meeting in that way.
Yeah, very good question. Because now it's all there. It's just a matter of being a little bit innovative, right? And drawing from people, as you just said, within that same organization, who will feel a sense of pride that they were able to do something different, and they're all learning the technology. Not everyone has really adopted all of the features that our platforms afford. And now tell me about you talk a lot more about breakouts in terms of having them be very specific to a topic. Can you tell me more about that?
Well, when we do breakout groups, because this is one of the most basic functions of Zoom, and it's powerful. And anybody who's listening who has a formal facilitation background will know what I'm talking about. We can have a meeting, and we put people in a breakout session, and we can say, go ahead and talk about XYZ. Well, what I would urge you to do, instead of just say talk about XYZ, is talk about XYZ and come up with 2 specific suggestions about what we can do differently or better. So we're driving toward an outcome, and there's an expectation that you know what you're going to talk about when you report back. The other option is, for example, if you have 3 agenda items for a 1-hour meeting, break your meeting into 3 groups, and each group handles a different agenda item to get the conversation started. So each group does a deep dive on one agenda item, and then we come back and report back and respond to each other. Suddenly a group has an ownership of one topic, so there's a pride in it, and then we respond to each other. So it's a divide and conquer approach, where you usually will get a lot more done instead of slugging through one agenda with everybody in it at the same time all the time, but possibly losing interest.
Right. Do you typically announce the agenda at the top of a meeting on Zoom? Do you lay it out, or do you keep some surprises along the way?
I remember just recently we had a 2-hour event with a client that you and I were working on, and we chose to keep the agenda a little open-ended, meaning we had a topic. The topic was very clear, but that wasn't about how much time we were spending on everything. I would say understand your culture. A specific agenda can be very comforting for people. But let's say if we have a 60 or 90-minute meeting and we have 4 agenda items, I would never say we're going to spend 10 minutes on this or 10 minutes on that. I love the ability to be fluid, because I also want to have the ability to spontaneously do a breakout room or spontaneously pair you up with someone.
Right. And that speaks to the structural variety that we're going to get to, because one of the things I found that when you send an agenda, people may tune out on parts of the agenda that don't relate to them or for which they have no interest. But this way you have set outcomes for the whole meeting, but you keep a little bit of suspense and variety to the agenda. So when you talk about structural variety, what does that mean for you?
Most traditional meetings have no structural variety whatsoever, right? There is a formal leader. He or she may have some PowerPoints. There may be other people who bring in a presentation PowerPoint, but it's a very predictable structure of how it unfolds. And we've all been in those meetings. Structural variety means, and this is so my background as a former theater director, is you mix up the beats and the energy in the meeting. So you might, for 10, 15 minutes, we're all talking together. But once that starts to feel predictable, let's break out into groups of threes for a while. Let's come back and talk as a whole group. Maybe now we go to pairs. Maybe now we do an annotated brainstorm. So by mixing it up, energetically, I'm surprising you and re-engaging you with a new structural choice. And because the common complaint is that in virtual, people can easily tune out, structural variety keeps re-engaging us as well.
Excellent. I want to remind people that we have just 7 minutes to go. So if you have a question, please post it in the chat. What about polls? What about some of the other bells and whistles that Zoom has in particular? And now we know that Teams and WebEx are also following suit in terms of introducing similar features.
Would you like to speak to that, Yuga? We just did a whole bunch of polls in the last few weeks from your perspective as a producer.
You can preload polls into Zoom, and that's something that I feel everybody is comfortable nowadays doing. What I suggest on polls is to keep them tight and short and sweet. So they're meant to bring people back to a certain topic and bring everybody into the same page. When polls tend to be extensively long and complicated, they can be actually counterintuitive. That's what I would say. Another technical thing in terms of as a producer is that when you do a poll on Zoom, you can do a single choice kind of poll, yes or no, or you can do multiple selections. So this can be fun to play with. And you can also add multiple questions to a single poll. But yet again, you want to make it about energizing the meeting and bringing people in together and then sharing the results. So if I have 5 people in the room, I might not do a poll. I might do the annotation. But if I have more than 10, I might be curious and seeing what other people are experiencing and to see if I can relate to what they're saying.
Mm-hmm.
One thing I love about polls is their speed. But as a leader of a meeting, I would use them to get quickly to information that your audience normally wouldn't reveal as quickly. For example, you're just rolling out a new initiative and your hunch is that people are uncomfortable with it, have concerns. So say, we just rolled an initiative XYZ. My biggest concern is, and then you give them 3 options and people say what their biggest concern is, and there it is. And in a poll, it's safe to say that. If you called on the person individually, that's high risk. But suddenly visually see, oh gosh, 80% of the people in this meeting are concerned about this thing.
Right.
Gosh, let's talk about it. So it's a powerful way of getting to personal information in a safe manner and then exploring it more deeply afterwards.
Correct.
And that's something that you wouldn't be able to do in an in-person meeting, getting that immediate group feedback and show it statistically to the group is not something that you would do in an in-person meeting, but in a virtual setting like Zoom, you can do that and use it in your favor.
Right. Yeah, you'd have to go to third-party apps in order to do something like Slido or something. Yeah. Karen has another question. Karen, thank you. I'm so glad you're so engaged. Karen asks again, what are the expectations, ways that you deal with individuals who show up on video, who do show up on video in person, and who set the expectation, who sponsor the meeting? And basically, she's talking about how do we get people to turn on their videos, if I'm understanding the question correctly.
I'm going to be really blunt here. Not turning on the video is it's just not acceptable, period. I would send out an invitation where I make it clear that to show up at this meeting, we expect you to put on the video. This is just Achim now, so I cannot speak for you. People who don't show up, don't turn on the video, I would ask to leave the meeting. People want, it's just like we've been doing this for over a year. And then Hugo and I had a conversation with a client last week that said, well, we want to be understanding of them not turning on the video. No, there is no reason for you to not turn it on. Yes, if you have to get up and go to the bathroom, put on your screen and come back, but otherwise, this is 2021. I have no compassion for you not willing to turn on the video. This is 2021, and not turning it on is not okay.
I totally agree, Achim. Now, we have just a couple of minutes left. I'd like you to look at the future. Now that some people are going back to work physically, how do you intend to operate in a hybrid environment?
Well, I just speak for myself. I get hired by clients, and I will happily show up in person if you want me to show up in person. What I love about the topic today, however, Rosemary, the way we've organized it is if you are listening and you are a stakeholder who can decide whether you and your team will meet in person and virtually, I would say if a strong element of meeting in person is social, you're strengthening the group bonds, then meet in person. But if these are more tactical meetings, more regular meetings, trust that you can actually get them done better virtually. So in the end, there'll be a hybrid, but the in-person is going to be more about, we want to feel each other. We want to celebrate each other. But the basic business aspect of meetings can be done, in my opinion, more effectively via Zoom.
Right. So in essence, when you talk about a producer, about using all the annotations and all the features, using the breakouts, this is really immersive, right? People are really more in each other's faces and interacting in a more intimate way. And that ultimately leads to better outcomes and better teams, right?
Yeah.
Is that a good assessment?
Yes.
Yeah. If there was, oh, I'm sorry, I cut you off.
No, a view that I have on this is that using virtual meetings, since everybody's working from home, it's a great opportunity to get to know people outside of their role that they are usually on the workplace, and you have a window into the intimacy of their house. If they're open to it, the relationship it's open to it. You get things to share. Like I draw this painting. Look, sorry, wrong side. I draw this. So it's one thing that it humanizes you and it goes beyond the role. And I think that that's a very useful opportunity when you're working from home to bind to get closer to the other person on the other side of the screen.
Yes, but as a former theater director, of course, you want to have elements around you, right, that do speak a little bit to your personality, right, not just anything.
Well, my biggest pet peeve is, and I know it's for you as well, you and I spent 2 weeks again last week, over 12 hours virtual with people who still are not well lit. It's like, come on, you've been on video for a year and nobody told you that we can't see you, and we can all go to Target and buy a light that lights us. So that drives me nuts.
Yes.
But to build on what Hugo was saying, I think we can get creative with the background, because we have this fantasy that real life meetings are more intimate. And I think of them more superficial meaning chit-chatty, water cooler intimate. But there's an intimacy to the three of us seeing each other on the screen right now. And I see your room and you're in my living room right now.
Yeah.
See Hugo's drawing. That's a different kind of intimacy. That's really valuable.
Wonderful. This has been a great conversation. I'm going to put your contact information on the screen so that we can continue this conversation offline. Achim, Hugo, thank you so very much for all this great insight. And I know that we can all benefit from it because we will continue to be living on Zoom. And now we know that we can get more business done more effectively, more efficiently by using virtual platforms. Thank you all very much. Thank you for watching. And see you next time on Makeover Mondays on LinkedIn Live and Facebook. Thank you all for watching.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.